Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to FARview, the podcast series of the Foundation for Auditing Research. Our guest for today is Wim Gijselaers, who's a professor of educational research at the School of Business and Economics at Maastricht University. However, today's episode is somewhat different from what you're used to. Although the interview was intended as a follow-up Q&A to our online conference, it evolved into a much broader podcast. Professor Gijselaers was courteous enough to answer a wide range of questions, and the end result is a meandering conversation on the topic of his research in general. So without further ado, I hope you'll enjoy this podcast. Professor Gijselaers, welcome and thank you for doing this follow-up Q&A with us. I have 4 questions in total, and I suggest that we just jump right in, starting with the first question. So the first question is, what are the most significant drivers for having less reflexivity in the ineffective team's context?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, actually. So when we talk about reflexivity, we talk about the issue that teams fail to share or discuss relevant information, or they fail to elaborate and examine the implications of shared information, or they fail to update their prior conclusions or current behaviors. Mm-hmm. And so when talking about team reflexivity, we should keep in mind that it's normally being defined as the extent to which group members reflect upon and communicate about the objectives of the groups, the decision-making processes, and the way they should adapt to the situation they are in. Okay, so I give your question a thought because, and then the question is, how could it be that some groups don't engage in that kind of reflexivity? Yeah. And there are 3 kinds of explanations for it.
Okay.
And they are 3 different levels. And the first is at the level of the firm. The second is the level of the audit engagement itself. And the third is the team as a social entity. Mm-hmm. When looking at the firm level, you might say there are structural features and cultural features. And the structural are typically time and budget pressure, as we know from many issues audit firms encounter. That's not new for them. Yeah. So if time pressure or budget pressure goes up, the likelihood that team will reflect goes down. But that's not enough. Then there are cultural features. Those are the norms which have been developed within the firm about how you should express your disagreement. And what people typically tend to do when pressure goes up, they start to search for comfort. And what they also do is they avoid conflict. And why is that? Because if on top of all the pressure you would also encounter conflict, that makes the situation even worse. So what firms could do in terms of counteraction at the level is that in their policy making, they should do everything they can do to support their professionals. And in their culture, at the firm level, there should be alignment between what they espouse and versus what they enact. So the official message they're giving, and the ways that's been shown in everyday practice.
Yeah.
When looking at the engagement level, it's about the complexity of the audit and the way they use their decision tools, which might put them in a situation of the illusion of control. Mm-hmm. And when they feel we are in control of the whole process, reflexivity is not typically you would expect to happen because it's not necessary. And so that requires that the pre-stage of the audit, in my view, senior staff should put a lot of effort in diagnosing the situation they're in, and that the partner does a briefing to the team on what the partner is expecting from the team. And then there should be a follow-up meeting quite quickly, actually, on how things are going. And then the third level, which is a drive for having less reflexivity, is that the team as a group what teams tend to do is they're always looking for comfort. So they create routines, and routines which helps them to create that level of comfort, even though it might be in kind of they need to deal with unpleasant situations, like I would nearly say like a bad marriage. At least it's comfortable. Yeah, it can be comfortable because you know what you can expect.
Yeah.
But it does. Yeah, and the same could be the case over here. In terms of counteractions, I would say, well, teams should, at the engagement level, as I said, partners should be much more involved in helping teams in the beginning what the partner expects is going to be the case.
Mm-hmm.
And the second is there should be follow-ups. And the other is that teams should learn that there is a difference between being comfortable, or that's not the same as trusting the other.
Mm-hmm.
So what team leaders should do is create sufficient level of trust and safety.
Yeah.
And so that's what research says about why teams are not showing that kind of level of reflexivity which is needed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so the safety you're talking about, of course, is psychological safety.
Yes, it's a psychological safety, but psychological safety is not coziness.
Yeah. So they might be adverse to conflict, but sometimes conflict can actually enact positive change.
Yes. Yeah. So it could be something that the other gives a signal that I really disagree with what you're saying,
mm-hmm.
and then starts asking, but please could you explain to me why you're saying this without making it personal?
Yeah.
This is a very tough thing to do, and therefore I'm saying it's not about creating a cozy situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's much more that I know that the other is being critical because the other wants to help me.
Yeah. So this also touches on something else that you've analyzed, which is this notion of constructive conflict, I guess.
Yes.
And some people might be adverse to the idea of any type of conflict. The thing I was wondering about in the case of constructive conflict, how does a team leader, or how does a team, or maybe even the firm culture, enact a structure in which constructive conflict doesn't turn into destructive conflict? How do you keep that balance?
Well, let me put it this way. There are signals where you get a feeling like, wow, this is a great discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw it happening 2 years ago when we were doing research in summer school of one of the big fours, that people said at the end, wow, this was really great because we had a lot of fun and it was very challenging. And so it's not either or, it's both.
Yeah.
And the delicacy in avoiding destructive or negative conflict is that, for example, when you make a joke, it should not be a joke about the other, but it should be a joke to relieve the tension which is building up in the group. You should be very explicit in when someone says something and you say, well, I have a different view. Let me explain first my view, and then also tell you how it disconnects from your view.
Yeah.
And you make it factual.
Yeah.
So it should be factual. You should be very explicit in where you disagree, and your body language should be such that you're expressing interest in the other.
Okay.
So I want to hear your view because I'm interested in you, and I know I can trust you.
Yeah. So the tone, the body language drives the way that this constructive conflict works within a team, which is an interesting note, especially now that a lot of people have to work from home. It's difficult to get those social cues.
Yes, it is, because one of the most important cues you can get in daily life is eye contact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, in a Zoom session, that's or in a team session or Skype, that's nearly impossible.
Yeah.
Because first of all, people are rarely they look into the camera, just like I'm doing, because I'm constantly looking below the focus of the camera. You don't know. Sometimes people are doing it like this. And they're gone.
The listeners, of course, cannot see this, but they'll have to imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, or people are doing all of a sudden like doing it like this, or they start looking at their cell phone.
Yeah.
So those are the pretty obvious things, but in a Zoom session, it's especially when it's a kind of it's getting a bigger meeting. It's very difficult to time your moment and say something.
Yeah.
So what people tend to do is they give up.
Okay.
Why would I say something?
Yeah.
And so it depends on the leader, whether the leader, when the session starts, just, let's say, has some time for a social talk for the first 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now here's the problem. The problem is the moment everyone starts doing so, every session, the first 5 minutes, the leader's asking, how are you and whatever. And I bought some nice pair of shoes last week. People think, oh, come on, that's what this person has learned at the management training.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not authentic.
Needs to be genuine.
Yeah, and so yes, you need to be trained in the sense that you need to be aware of the impact you are having on the others.
Yeah.
But it should same should be authentic, and that makes it so hard to keep engaging in video sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes it so easy for team leaders to simply forget the impact the team leader has on the others.
Yeah, of course. It sounds like it's an important tool that they still need to acquire. A lot of teams need to acquire in these what are very unprecedented times, and they might continue for the foreseeable future. I guess this is also something they just need to learn. They need to deal with, and as you say, leadership, even in a setting like a Zoom or a Skype call, can be very important, but it needs to be authentic and genuine, just as you also indicate in the meta-analysis.
Yeah. So the meta-analysis showed this, and in the what I didn't mention in my talk was that a couple of years ago I had a PhD who was researching how people behave in online courses, and that was being done in a large global organization.
Mm-hmm.
And there we found out a very unexpected result that the higher you are in the hierarchy,
Mm-hmm.
the more you talk in an online setting. And people didn't know. And even when people didn't know who had what kind of position in the hierarchy of the organization, that the ones who talked most were the ones who had the highest position in the hierarchy. And they felt that was perfectly normal.
Okay.
And what they didn't know or were not aware of how intimidating that was to the young people.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, you went through a kind of a natural selection process in your organization because of, you know all the ins and outs of the company.
Mm-hmm.
And as a consequence, you're more dominant.
Yeah.
So now that you know all this, the thing you should do is you should be aware of your behavior and the impact it has on the others. Now, and why am I constantly emphasizing that this is so important? Because what I tried to make clear in my talk was that there's a very strong connection between how people behave in a group session and the way they perform as a group.
Okay. So it's a direct proxy for the actual group dynamics.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, it's even worse. So the group dynamics are a very good proxy for the way the group forms.
Okay.
And one of the explanations is, especially in auditing, and that's one of the reasons why I feel it's such a fascinating environment, is because of the hierarchy. The higher you are in the hierarchy, the more dependent you are from the information which has been collected and interpreted at the bottom line. So it seeps all the way upwards. And every time it's interpreted, evaluated, connected to other bits and pieces of information.
Yeah.
And what we know from research is that if the young people in the hierarchy feel disconnected to the group,
mm-hmm.
for whatever reason, they tend to withhold sometimes important pieces of information.
Okay.
and it's not on purpose. It just happens. And for them, it may even be the case that they don't know that they are withholding important information.
Okay,
So they
because
might
they
think,
feel
"Oh, that's
because they feel that
it
it's
is."
not a climate where they can share. What's driving that?
So it could be that they feel like, you know what, it looks like it probably is not important.
Okay,
So why would I speak up?
they feel insignificant in a way.
Yeah, and they can't judge the importance of the information because they're young.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know.
Yeah.
And so why is that reflexivity then so important all of a sudden? Because you create moments where you at least you attempt to analyze how the group is working, and the difficulty lies in it should not be a discussion where I would say to you, for example, I notice you are very silent. So that's like a direct attack on someone else.
Yeah, it makes it very personal.
Yeah, you make it personal. Why are you so silent?
Yeah.
Please could you join as well? And you feel like you're in high school,
Mm-hmm.
or a teacher was asking you to say, hey, what are you doing in the classroom? And so that makes it so difficult for the team leaders to be aware of the role they play in the group.
Yeah. Because in a way, it's difficult for them to really identify with the position of someone coming in at a much more junior level also.
Yeah, they forgot. They forgot. Many people just simply forget how it was when they were young.
Yeah, yeah.
And they forget that when a junior person is asking a question, that might also be interpreted as a signal of I don't know.
Yeah. They might be afraid to give off that signal because their situation is more precarious than someone who's been in a firm for many years and solidified their position.
Yeah.
So
and that's why I keep saying that if those hierarchical audit teams are not paying attention to the social process of the work, the social nature of their work, they run a risk. And the risk is that the information flow is not optimal, while the partner is dependent on the quality of the information flow.
So when you talk about reflexivity, it's best to have set protocols, you feel, where you just have set moments, almost like if you have a very busy life and you have a date night with your wife, it seems kind of artificial to put that in an agenda, but it's good to have a clear schedule for reflexivity in a team, or how does that work best?
Some would say you need to have a clear schedule, and what I would probably do is, as a partner, I would put substantial effort in the analysis of the client or the audit I need to make at the beginning. Then sit together with my group and communicate the way I analyze the risks in this particular audit, what I feel is important that they're doing.
Yeah.
And then I would, let's say, 1 or 2 weeks later already, I would call in another meeting and just ask how things are going. And by asking factual questions, whether they thought of this, have they looked at this, what are their first interpretations, I would show from a factual perspective my interest in them.
Yeah.
I would ask whether they have seen this before. And I would also tell them, I've seen a similar thing before, and then this was the case. What do you expect will happen?
Okay.
And that's a different signal of showing that I'm interested in you than asking you how are you, because that's just a hollow phrase.
And indeed, it's very difficult.
Yeah, it is very, and what we have seen in other research is that juniors said to us in the interview studies, I was so lucky with this partner because he knew my name. He always had time for me. When I was talking to the partner, he wasn't looking at his cell phone. He was looking at me.
Yeah.
And I really felt the partner gave genuine feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very elementary, and that's also what all this research shows about safety and trust and the importance of leaders is that it's authentic interest in the work you are doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a two-way street, of course, because one of the things you mention in your executive summary is also that good leadership shows vulnerability and talks about the past struggles that they themselves have had in their work.
Yeah.
So it works both ways. You have to give something to receive something.
Yeah. So what partners could do is that make very explicit that in the past they have seen similar cases, or they had seen cases where everything looked well, and then by coincidence they noticed certain deviating details, or where they tell a story that typically in this with this type of client you might expect this, so please do me a favor. Don't take for granted whatever the client is telling you about this particular situation.
Yeah.
And then you get a different kind of connection with the juniors.
Yeah.
And of course I can imagine that for partners that since they face a lot of budget pressure as well, and
Of course.
they need to make a profit as well, so that sometimes you don't have time for it. But that's if you have invested in the beginning and made clear to everyone, sorry guys, but there might be moments that I look a little bit rude, but it's because of my calendar and the things I have on my calendar for the next few weeks.
Yep.
Then basically you are developing a credit with the other person.
Yep. You're building up an actual relationship in which you're just clear, coherent. You explain what's happening, and it lessens their. Well, I can imagine it lessens their anxiety about the day-to-day procedures.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean,
I can fully understand that people feel like this is just wishy-washy talking about social processes, and so what are they telling to me? So don't we need more tools or whatever?
Yeah.
And my answer would be, I'm so sorry for you, but as in my talk I explained, you can improve your technology, and you should improve your procedures, and you should. And then there's still a huge portion left, and that's called social dynamics. So we have seen the same in aviation, we have seen in healthcare, and we are seeing it over and over again within audit firms.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned these fields. Is there a particular reason why you chose for a field like aviation, which you have a personal love for, but is there also an objective reason why it's a good proxy industry?
Yes, because when you look at the research, which is analyzing aviation incidents, and then you see that with the steep increase of air traffic, so you also saw in the beginning a steep increase in accidents. And that happened till the 60s. And then with the introduction of new technologies, the increase starts to decline, but it's still increasing. And then they start to improve procedures and recording everything, and the overseeing and reviewing becomes much more stringent and more focused. And then slowly you start seeing a decline, and then there's something left which they can't improve anymore with newer technology, with new procedure. That's called the human factor. And only when they started working on the human factor, they got the near zero accident rate. That was for me one of the reasons to start looking in the social mechanisms in professions which are very let's say, risk prone.
Okay.
And auditing, in my view, is one of those risk prone professions.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's also very public. If there are mistakes that are made, then it usually gets a lot of media attention as well.
Yes. Yeah. So that and that's another reason for me in terms of personal interest that when you look at their work, it's not just an issue of you make a mistake and it's costly,
Mm-hmm.
but you also hit the press, you get the attention of the overseer.
Yep.
And I can't imagine that anyone would like to be in such a situation.
Indeed. And that explains the choice for the medical profession as well, which is another field that you looked at for the literature.
Yeah. So although the medical profession that's also quite interesting. When they started noticing the effects of introducing checklists in the work,
mm-hmm.
many health professionals were withholding it, and they didn't want to use it.
Okay.
Because they said it takes a lot of time. Even when it was 90 seconds only, they said, no, this is not helpful or whatever.
Wow.
And so what we also found, well, not us, but in healthcare, they found out that it depends on the way the checklist is specified, whether it's helpful, yes or no.
Yeah.
If it's poorly designed, it's indeed, it slows you down.
Mm-hmm.
The same that I found out in aviation. It depends on the way you design checklists. And Teresa Groenhuis, Roger Meers, and I, we also did a checklist study in auditing. And that we found that depending on the way you design the checklist might even ruin the whole audit process, because now people make with more confidence or the wrong decision because they went through the checklist.
Yep.
So checklist didn't help them in noticing that there was something going wrong. So it depends on how you design that checklist.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't like it. It's like driving your car. There are also checklists for how you should drive a car. Look in the mirror to the left. Okay. People don't like it because they just want to do it.
Yeah.
So that's the similar effect.
Do you have to feel ownership of what's in these checklists? Does that help?
Yes, that helps. And it helps whether it cues you to certain known things.
Mm-hmm.
But you should be trained to see what is necessary to know.
Okay.
Yeah, if I would say to you, if the checklist would say when driving a car, be careful, but it doesn't have any meaning to you.
Yeah. It's abstract.
Then it's abstract, and so that's a thing we found as well. So if it's a meaningless checklist, no, it doesn't help.
Okay.
But again, what it demonstrated in my view is that yes, human factor does play a substantial role, and yes, it does so in auditing.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't go on with building another IT platform with another set of tools. Yes, you need those tools, sure you do. And sure, we should take into account the role of the overseer and legislation. Sure, we do. But then there's still the human factor.
Yep.
And that's the area where we are playing role. And then what you're finding all the time is that I'm always saying it's not rocket science. It's about, let's say, the fundamentals of how you engage in interaction with others and how you consider your role as a leader.
Well, this is interesting. I'm going to pick up on this because it brings me to one of the Q&A questions as well. One of the members of the audience had a question that the composition of the team, it doesn't matter. It's really the leadership that's the driving aspect. Would you agree with that?
Yes. It's the team composition research has taught us one lesson, that you can't predict from the team composition performance.
Okay.
Well, that goes against every intuition people are having.
Yeah.
Because they would say to me, So are you saying that if Ajax wouldn't recruit Messi, that doesn't help them? And my answer in a way is yes, that's what I'm saying. And because what we forget, it would only help if the team and the coach would accept him, and maybe they should reorganize the way they play and adapt it to Messi, and it should be the other way around. That's the first thing. So what team research, however, does show is that yes, the leader matters, and team composition. You can only, let me put it this way, only when the team leader has created the right team processes, then maybe in hindsight you might say team composition played a role.
Yeah.
Because some people finally could use their potential and show what they are worth in a team.
But the starting position is with the leader. It's the condizione sine qua non.
Yes, and people also tend to forget, in a way that they tend to forget how they were performing in secondary and primary school.
Yeah.
Depending on the teacher they had for a certain course, they started to have great performance, or it became all of a sudden poor performance. And why was that? Well, research would say it because of the way you got attention from your teacher.
Okay.
It's the same here. So all the research we have been doing, and the work we know from other researchers says, what good leaders do is they create a sense of belonging to a team, and they do it sometimes they do it within the first 15 minutes, that you think, wow, I want to work with that person.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. And the mechanism behind of this, and that's what you can train. You can observe whether the feel good you're having with the team, that it depends on. So people have the feeling I can contribute to the team whenever I feel it's relevant. So is my contribution valued? That's the first anchor point. And the second anchor point is whether the team leader is sensitive for your emotionality.
Okay.
So if you have a bad day, or you're in your mind you're busy with something else,
right? Do they pick up on this?
Yeah, they pick on that, and they might just say like, "Hey, it looks like your mind is drifting away."
Yeah. That's a good point. So all of there was a buzzword maybe a few decades ago. I'm not a sociologist or a psychologist, but there was a buzzword that was emotional intelligence. Yeah. That actually does play a role for leadership.
Yes. If we would define emotional intelligence as the capacity to sense with the others how they feel and how they act given their feeling, yes, that plays a role.
Okay. And it might be a very important one to getting a team that is highly performing.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's a very interesting, because I can imagine that time pressure and budget pressure, that's not really something that a lot of firms would focus on first and foremost when thinking about team dynamics, the emotional aspects.
No, because it's not, it's like a wasp. You want to get rid of it. Why should we pay attention to emotion? But when you think about another team where there's these young professionals who are thinking, am I going to make promotion? Do I feel happy in this company? Is there any potential for me making a career? Are they scared for making a mistake?
Yeah.
Or maybe they made a mistake and maybe the company is going to do something about it. Yeah, so emotions do play a role in the sense that they give you a feeling of efficacy, self-efficacy. I can do it.
Yep.
Yeah, and what emotions also do is you're constantly signaling to the other, hey, I need your attention, or leave me alone, or So that's one, and the other is so equivocality is not about how much you talk.
Mm-hmm.
No, it is once you talk, are people listening to me?
Oh yeah. And then it might be better not to talk too much, but the moments that you do pick to talk are just as impactful as possible.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I'm going to jump into another Q&A question because I'm really keeping you with all of these side questions, but it's a very interesting topic. So, do you think team composition with weak and strong performers leads to better performance as the diversity affects team reflexivity?
Yeah, that was a good question.
Yeah, it is.
Because the classic view on teams is that you need diversity.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, and all the research has shown that yes, indeed, sometimes it helps. But when you put all those studies together, you will find zero relation.
So there's no robustness.
There is no. But, and then it depends. So it depends on, so diversity helps depending on whether the leader has created a climate that people are trying to get the most out of the other, and depending whether the leader wants to invest in the underperformers.
Okay, to crank it up to make sure that it improves.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you circle back to what we were already talking about with the role of leadership and the way that they should handle certain issues.
Yes.
Okay, that's very clear.
That's the moment when I start saying, I'm so sorry. That's the way it is.
Yeah. Okay. So what
or I might say you can't buy it.
Yeah. No, I understand.
It's not something you go into a shop and you buy it from the shelf and you think, oh, no, I did. Or you are going to a training center, pay 5,000 euros for a 2-day training, and you think, oh, now I can do it.
That's very clear. So one of the interesting things about the presentation you gave during the conference and also the executive summary or working paper, however we want to label it, is that you had a number of reflections at the end that were not so much on the specific topic of what you studied, but more on methodologies and ways forward, which I thought was very helpful, also for us as an organization, but maybe also for the firms to pick up on. I have one question that kind of goes along with these reflections from the Q&A. So I'm going to ask that one first, and then I'll ask a couple more questions. So in the reflections, you mentioned that constructing a shared language is a very valuable asset to building long-term relationships with practice. Mm-hmm. And the question from the audience was, one person wonders that if interview results might be more meaningful to both academics and practice if you would use the words of the interviewees to describe the construct and not the words of academic theory. It says, if so, can you give us some examples of which words they used to describe each term? And they would ask to put it up on a slide, which unfortunately we cannot do now.
Yeah, I guess the question is about the moment we label something with an academic construct. Mm-hmm. So what behavior will we notice in practice?
Yeah.
And so the most elementary level when it's sharing information in the model. So so the first finding is there's no difference in the way that people share information in a low performing team versus a high performing team.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's skip that because people talk in terms of the amount of facts they got, whether the facts were timely delivered. They talk about the information they are getting. So those are the words: facts, information, whatever.
Yeah.
Good. Then the first difference, the first important things are when they talk. No one talks about co-construction. Mm-hmm. Yeah, not at least not any normal person. But what co-construction is, I am talking about bits and pieces of information which are important, and then the author says, okay, let me add to this. Yeah. I found this.
Yeah.
So, and the way the interviewees were talking about it was that they were putting together the bits and pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, or they were putting it in a meaningful framework, or they were running the tests and where they had to collect all necessary elements of information.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people talk about it, I'm doing my part and the other person is doing the other part. So that's called construction.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, they have a language to make clear to the other what they are asking. So they would say like, whatever I asked, I got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, good. Then you get to the level of constructive conflict. People were saying to us, we agree to disagree.
Okay.
We agree to be very critical about each other, but in a positive way. Yeah, we agreed that we could engage in debate without hurting the other. We were showing a respect for the other. It's that kind of wording they use. And then when they talked about safety, they were talking in. I always felt perfectly safe to give him a call. Or I never felt stupid to knock on the partner's door and ask whether she had 5 minutes for me.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I felt perfectly happy to ask a question, and partner was always there for me, or the manager was always there for me whenever I felt it was necessary.
Yep.
So that's the kind of words people are using when they talk about psychological safety.
Well, I think one of the concerns maybe from some of the audience members is that you would impose academic constructs on practitioners, which is of course not what you're doing. You're interpreting what they're saying and then adding an academic concept to it to place it within a certain framework, within a certain paradigm of what you're studying, of course.
Yeah, but so in that respect, I felt it was an interesting question because academics, that's what academics are paid for.
Yep.
So they look to the world and then they attach an academic flag to it and saying this is this and this social phenomenon is that.
Yeah.
But what we noticed in the interviews, and I felt that's much more important, is we interviewed people who had a very good eye for making the distinction between an effective versus an ineffective team. And they knew it was not lying in the way people were sharing information. That doesn't say a thing because everyone shares.
Yeah.
Because people are trained in doing so. But it gets something different when people think, maybe I shouldn't say so because I don't know. So they start withholding, or they are doubting, or they get uncertain. Should I say this? I don't know because maybe it makes me feel stupid. Or I don't want to. From what I've seen in those interviews, that some people said, I knew we were not collecting what was necessary, but I knew that the moment I raised that issue, I was slowing them down. And that's it. So that when the person would say I was slowing them down, that's a signaling for unsafety.
Yep.
Or when people said, but I'm the one who is always critical. I felt I was always the negative one. That's the way people were talking about it. That's also a signal for unsafety.
Yeah. Or at least perceived unsafety, because of course there's not only the group culture, but also within the individual what they project on a certain situation.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was one of the reflections. I guess this is a bit different, but the idea was a shared language is one of the reflections that you had, which I can imagine can sometimes be difficult for scientists to communicate their findings in a way that's picked up exactly how they meant it when it goes to practitioners. They have a very different world that they live in.
Yeah. Yeah, well, but that's different. That's the question about the reflections I made at the end of my
But
presentation.
it does go
So
into
I
the
was
notion of a shared language, of course, these constructs as well. Of course, that has more to do with methodology, but in the practical implementations of findings and the long-term relationships and partnerships and communications, language and constructs come up again, of course.
Yeah, but my plea was what I would recommend the Foundation for Audit Research is that whenever you do research, they should try to step away from their current model. The researcher has a great idea, and then he thinks, I might test it in practice.
Yep.
Because it helps me in theory development.
Yep.
And I was saying that's not the way to go. That's something that universities should do, and that's what they're paid for in society. And I was saying that FAR should try to create a situation that would make them unique, where the firms are creating their questions together with the academics, such that when the answers are there, that it helps both the academics and the firm. And my experience is that it takes many, many years before you have learned to accept and respect the other party.
Yeah, I can imagine. In a way, it goes back to co-construction, right? But you're co-constructing a research question, and there's a lot of there's a lot of mechanism working behind the eventual research question. Oftentimes, you only really solidify your research question the moment your research is done, because then you know what you've actually answered. But this building up of long-term partnerships, I guess you can take a lot of what you've discussed on the effects of learning and sustainable learning behaviors, psychological safety, and all of these other aspects into that environment as well.
Yes, you could be, because from what I've learned in working with audit firms, it takes several years before you understand their language, their concerns. And then it also takes time before you think, the way they are talking about it, that looks like it might fit in that particular theoretical framework.
Yeah.
And when the moment that happens, you have the connection.
Yeah.
Because we are both winning in doing the research.
There's a clear trade-off.
Yes. And what it does, it creates it improves the ownership with the firm. And for me, but that's more maybe a personal thing, I love it the moment I see that my theories work.
Yeah, I can imagine. Sometimes it's very unbalanced, of course, because the firms do a lot of hard work collecting the data, and they have to have people willing to do the surveys and the experiments, and it's not always very clear what the result is for them. For the scientists, it's very clear. They get their data, they can publish, and that's how you build up a career. But for the firms, it's more of a long-term investment, and then both parties are really benefited by building up a partnership in which you assess which questions should be asked, what's most relevant for them, and then also connect it to a feedback loop where they get results that they can actually implement and work on. One of the things I found interesting, and maybe we'll do this as the closing question. I've kept you for way too long. You propose a type of clinical research methodology going forward. What do you mean exactly with that in the reflections?
You need to help me a little bit more.
So you're talking, I can get the PDF as well. So you're talking about a constant feedback loop, I guess, in research and in the results. You kind of equate it with the way that clinical research happens.
Yeah. I remember. Yes. Yeah, now I remember. Yeah. So what I was saying was that I feel that business researchers could learn a lot from the way clinical research has been organized.
Yeah.
So in the in healthcare, there's a clear-cut divide between what the clinicians do. That's focused on action. They need to do something, but it should be based on science.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they do is because every day they are trying to explore the implications of let's say the fundamental sciences in practice.
Yeah.
But they don't do it separately. They do it together. And they know from each other is that they do have different responsibilities. And maybe they sometimes dislike each other because the fundamental guys would say, oh, wait a minute, you're too fast. And the clinicians think, but I need to act. Yet they know that they need each other, and that makes them great, in my view.
Yep.
In business, we are still in a situation, and I hope my colleagues will forgive me in a way, that we think that we are the ones who own the theories,
mm-hmm.
and it doesn't matter whether practice behaves like theory. So if practice doesn't behave like theory, we consider that as a dysfunctioning of practice. And my point is that when you look at the way I've been, what I experience when I work with audit firms is that they're very hard. They try to do their best, and they want to improve. And science might help them to do it even better. But the only way it will work is if the practitioners get a sense of understanding what is driving the scientists, and the other way around.
Yep.
And my experience shows that if you keep investing in it and you start to appreciate each other's strengths,
mm-hmm.
then all of a sudden some new research practices can develop, which you might never see before, and which become very powerful. That's my thing.
Yeah. Well, that's a very interesting point. I think I'm going to leave it at this because I've kept you for way too long already. Professor Gijselaers, thank you so much for doing the Q&A and hybrid podcast all in one. I apologize for asking so many questions, but it truly is an interesting topic.
No, it was interesting to do so I didn't mind asking. That you were asking all those questions. Yeah,
that's good news. Good luck with the rest of the projects that you have going, and as soon as there's something relevant for FAR, I will definitely contact you again.
Okay, good. Well, have a nice day. It was nice talking to you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah?